If you go on to test.dreadnought.io, which is where most people design ships, and you click new ship, you make a new ship, you log on, and then you cheat some items in, of course, you might end up seeing some things. You might, when you search up Shredder, find a golden Shredder. You might, when you search up a legacy, find a legacy Fabricator. And there's so much more. Today, I'm going to be talking about it. Now let's get into it. When you go onto someone's ship, who's especially an older player, you might end up finding a thing called a legacy Fabricator. You might find the golden Shredder. And this isn't a real server. And you wonder, where did these come from? You might even find a eternal bronze wrench, eternal silver wrench, eternal gold wrench, and eternal flux wrench. And that's just to name a few. You might even find wrenches or cosmetics. You might even find, if they're especially an experienced player, you might even find some bug hunter trophies. Or even a null trophy. Well, if you dig in a little bit deeper, you're going to find it's a lot more complicated than you once expected in an IO game that many of you thought you just get flux. Well, it all started with when COG opened this game to beta players. From what I've been able to gather from some very experienced players, there was a item that you could get from red bots. And you can normally have gotten, I believe, RCs from red bots. But even more notably, you could get balls. And these balls were preempted and were actually removed due to a bug when it actually went out of beta. Now, COG tried to make those items get reverted into its golden form, which is why on hatches, whenever you search it up, you can find golden balls. Now, no one that I know of has actually golden balls, otherwise they would be worth a fortune. This prompted the kind of start of the first items that were really unobtainable. Then, as the game grew and as the game progressed, and this is, by the way, in 2019, around May, mind you, COG had shredders. And he noticed a lot of people were griefing, but not for the sake of helping themselves, just to really be toxic to other players. And he noticed people would just join a ship, and if they could get reaching a fab, they could craft themselves a shredder and then shred everything in the ship, especially if the captain was AFK. So COG removed the shredder, but he left all the remaining shredders. So anyone who had a shred bomb ship was very rich, or if they just had shredders. Now, this was a big deal because you couldn't craft them, but you could normally buy one for maybe 1 or 2 RCs. They were extremely cheap because, remember, a lot of people had shredders anyways on their ships, and it wasn't something really highly regarded. And so a lot of players tried to collect them because they were unobtainable, and the idea COG had would be that it would be an item that, and you could obtain it from killing blue bots, actually. He had the idea that it would be a kind of a somewhat rare item that people could use as a shredder, but people can't craft it. And this ended up becoming a problem because there weren't enough. And as time progressed, these shredders kind of just fell astray, and not as many people had them because the people who did have them ended up quitting. And then that created a big problem. The price of them went up, and then COG realized he had to actually make it so you could craft shredders again. And what he did, because a lot of people are paying for these shredders, is he made them golden. Then he kind of continued with this pattern. Before he even did this, he had only one type of fab. It was just a fab that you start out with. Every single fab was the same. It could craft shields, it could craft ammo, it could craft blocks, it could craft everything. And then he ended up, COG wanted to split them into 3. Now this is really good for pretty much everyone because it made it way more difficult for someone to grief. Back then, there wasn't flux, there was no loaders, there was no automation. So you had to have crew to actually place the ammo in the RCs. Every ship was manual, so people needed access to the fabs to craft the ammo. Now this is a problem because those fabs could craft wrenches and shredders, and there was actually no way to tell if the person had a wrench or a shredder on their inventory because you couldn't even check it in the crew logs. So that was a huge problem. People would be griefing very easily, especially mid-battle. So COG decided to split them into 3 fabs, which made it so that ships could be potentially ungriefable even if they're manual, because you keep all of the fab, you just give them an ammo fab, and the other fabs that can actually lead to a grief will be locked away and only captains can access. Now, this is a pretty good thing, but the remaining fabricators that weren't starter were all reverted into legacy fabs, and you could originally change them into the munition fabs, the engineering fab, or the machining fab. And a lot of players did do this because they were lazy. They had a lot of ships and they just wanted to revert to a working design instead of destroying the fab and then placing a new one. Now, the people that still had them, it went up in value. Now, it's notable to keep in mind that test server was up. People knew about the update before it even happened, and players like myself, or Tiller, or Jirachi, or Icy Skater, to my knowledge, had actually crafted hundreds of fabricators before the update aired, and we crafted them so that when it became legacied, we would make a lot of profit, and we knew they got reverted. Now, notably, for me, myself, I did have access to a couple hundred of them. I ended up selling them to be able to buy golden shredders, a whole long list of things that ended up happening with me on there. And so, for a while, this was the only kind of really ultra rare item. But what ended up happening is Cog realized that he could he wanted to change a lot of the glitches and stuff. Now, what happened is there was a glitch, there was a series of bugs where you could actually glitch out what was called a 0 times item. So what would happen is you'd have, let's say, a piece of scatter, and then if that scatter was used in a certain glitch, you could get a piece of scatter and then a 0 times scatter as additionally. It usually would happen by the ship getting destroyed, and then it goes into, somehow you get it into the ship hatch system. So it's like not actually in the ship, it's like it's buffered, it's in the buffer, so if it could get leaked out, and then you'd have a 0 times item. There were a number of other glitches to get those too, and this was really just a problem with the programming, but Cog never reverted these 0 times items, so a lot of people collected them and would pay for them, and there was a whole market for them. But Cog realized there was a lot of dupes you could use those items for, and eventually someone realized how to make a dupe out of it. So Cog decided to instead replace it with what was called a silver 0 times trophy, or to my knowledge, I think there was a golden 0 times trophy to people who had 0 times items before a certain date. Now, this was a big deal because anyone who was collecting, now it really made it a safe item to collect. And someone like me, I ended up buying one. Now, he also, with the release of that item, he released a Bug Hunter trophy, which is a trophy he gives to anyone who finds a bug with the game. Now, speaking from experience, I got my 2 Bug Hunter trophies from one finding a dupe method, and the other finding a method to clone heal without any negative effects. Now, this is a huge deal, both of those, because they could break the game. Now, some people have gone Bug Hunter trophies for a lot less than that, for a lot more of a specific thing, but anything that really helps Cog can give a Bug Hunter trophy. Now, notably, Cog actually has to care about it. So, for example, if you make a healing bot script, and even if you give it to him, he actually notably, like with my case where I did make a script for it, he never ended up giving me a Bug Hunter trophy for it because he never patched it, which is kind of a sad time. So, it's a very risky thing, and it takes a lot of time, really, to get a Bug Hunter trophy. Now, Cog eventually realized he needs to monetize the game, and a lot of people don't like watching ads, and most people have ad blocker. So he released a way to donate to him on Patreon, and you'd get a benefit, but it really wasn't a paid benefit. It was called flux wrenches, or you could, depending on the amount that you donate, so $20 you could get a flux wrench, $15 for a gold wrench, $10 for a silver, and then $5 for a bronze. Now these wrenches he would personally give to you for the first month or two, but then he ended up making it automated. But the people where he gave them those wrenches and stuff, he ended up making them eternal. So now they were tied to the ship, so you couldn't eject them, but they were still a collectible item. The newer ones are now tied to the player. If you stop funding them on Patreon, they would disappear. But the previous ones were given by Cog, so they don't disappear. These items are highly collectible. People really want them. And ultimately, all of these items go for a fair amount because you really can't obtain them. It's important to keep in mind that if you really look for a lot of these collectible items, you can end up buying them. And you might be able to find a future one. Cog ends up building in a lot of updates these kinds of glitches and methods to actually do it. And if you find any bugs, you can get a Bug Hunter trophy. It's a very easy way to become prestige. Now, what's going to happen if there's a wipe? Apparently COG is going to keep the Bug Hunter trophies on players' ships, maybe even Eternal Wrenches. The rest of them will get reverted, likely. So it's nice to collect, but it's also important to keep in mind that most of them are cosmetic, specifically Bug Hunters. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. It's a little bit different format and different edited. Have a great rest of your day.